medical heritage, one of the oldest living traditions in the world, more than 3,000 years old. As per the database which we have been building for the last 15-16 years, we have more than 6,500 plant species which have been documented in medicinal use across the country in either the codified systems or even in the folk traditions. So this is the number we have in our database with each plant species clearly identified. Now, this is again a summary of what our database shows in terms of commonality and overlap across different systems of medicine in India, including Ayurveda, Siddha, Unani, Tibetan, even Homeo and folk level. So it shows that there is a whole lot of overlap across the species which are used in different systems. You can see that in Ayurveda we have 1539 species, and out of that 758 are common to Siddha, or within that there are 248 which is common to Tibetan system also. Even Chinese system, they are using something like 359 of the species which are known in Ayurveda. So there is a whole lot of commonality and overlap in species which are used for medicinal purposes across these systems. This is something we must appreciate. But how are these plants distributed? Obviously, these are distributed across different biogeographic zones and biotic provinces of the country. And therefore, what needs to be kept in mind is conservation action has to take place in those different biotic provinces and zones. That is what we need to keep in focus. These are the biogeographic classifications of India: 10 biogeographic zones, 25 biotic provinces. But looking at some estimates of medicinal plants, this is presenting a kind of a rough picture of total number of medicinal plant species across different biogeographic zones. You can see the figures are there, but I'll not read out these. I'll quickly run through some of these. For example, in Trans-Himalayan, we are looking at something like almost 700 species. And some of the important ones you can see in the photographs there: Ephedra gerardiana, or Hippophae rhamnoides, or even Arnabia euchroma. These are some of the important ones in that region. Looking at the northwest and west Himalayan region, we have something like 1,700 species of medicinal plants, and these are some of the well-known and important ones, starting with Sassoria costus, which is Kut, also Arnabia benthami or Aconitum heterophyllum. I heard in the morning talk about this important species being addressed in the project in Jeff. Ferula jeschiana, another important species of that region. Looking at central and eastern Himalayan side, some of the very important species of that region include Nardostachys grandiflora or Nardostachys jetamansi, even rhododendron anthopogon, Taxus wallichiana, though it is present in northwest Himalaya also, but major populations seem to be more into the eastern Himalaya. Panax pseudoginseng is kind of a species which has been recently documented in detail, and now we are finding that there are sizable populations of this in the eastern Himalaya. Maybe 20, 15 years back, we didn't know of this. But now, because of botanical documentation, it is known. Northeast India generally is a high diversity zone. In spite of the lower level of botanical documentation done there, still we have something like 2,000 species known in that area. And some of the important ones include Aquilaria agalocha or Aquilaria malacensis, which is agar, and other ones, which is like Ambroma augusta, and sometimes called Abroma augusta. M is missing sometime. You have to decide which one is correct, but Smilex glabra and vetiver is common throughout the country. Now, looking at this perspective, when we look at what is the threat level overall, we find that one of the compilation which was done by IUCN in 1997 listed something like 12.5% of all known plant species as threatened. Taking that as a rough estimate, and applying that percentage onto the total number of medicinal plant species of, let's say, 8,000 species which occur in India, this would convert into about 1,000 species. So that means that we should be looking at something like 1,000 medicinal plant species which are possibly threatened. Unfortunately, we don't know which are those ones and where they occur. So this is a challenge to figure out which are those species and where are they occurring, and then take action. Now, if we look at available literature, the 3 volumes of Red Data Book on Indian plants by BSI, and compare them with the list of medicinal plants of India, we have hardly around 60 species in that. Yeah. 12.5. 12.5. 1/8, you can say. Now, Red Data Book, Indian plants available, published. Last one was published sometime in 85, 87, when we compare only 60 medicinal plant species. When we are saying that possibly 1,000 are perhaps threatened, this 60 is a very small number. Obviously, the gap needs to be addressed. This large gap has to be addressed through some rapid methods. We cannot leave it to long-term 20-year studies before we can decide which one to focus on. Just to address that, we have been doing some activities which we call conservation assessment and management prioritization, which I'll discuss later. But resulting from this prioritization, what we need to do is primarily in situ conservation. Because in situ conservation is the primary and most cost-effective method for long-term conservation of medicinal plant diversity. Cultivation, however, can ensure immediate availability, it can provide the resource, but cannot ensure long-term conservation. Conservation has to begin in situ, where the live populations exist, where the gene bank is. Now we have these different life forms which are used. Well, I'll quickly run through because the time is limited. Maybe, yeah, when we were assessing what is the current level of trade of species which are identified as threatened. For example, we came out with a publication on red listed medicinal plants of southern India. We had listed 100 species. When we compared it with the ones which are in trade, we found almost 70 of those are in trade. It might be a different level of trade, sometimes very limited trade, sometimes larger volumes, but they are in trade. So there is a correlation between threat status and consumption and trade. It's not totally independent, though many times the threat might be on account of habitat loss and degradation, but over-harvesting also has a contribution in that. And that is what we need to appreciate and understand. Now, as I was saying, to quickly work out, rapidly figure out species which are of high conservation concern, we have been organizing what we call conservation assessment and management prioritization processes and workshops. Prioritized and assessed and assigned red list status in those efforts spanning over more than 15 years, and total of 335 species belong to the category near threatened or higher threats. Near threatened, vulnerable, endangered, and critically endangered. So these are the highest priority species according to us to begin with. I'm not saying this is the end. This is just the beginning. This is the first cut we have done. There is a need to do these exercises in different states and more vigorously, and maybe repeated through, supplemented through field studies to get to the real assessment of threat status and take action. But there is definitely a need for rapid action. We cannot wait for long field studies before doing anything. We must start action parallelly using this rapid assessment exercise. That's what I would suggest. Some of the examples of Indian medicine plants of high conservation concern. You can see Coccinum fenestratum has been assessed as critically endangered in Karnataka, Kerala, and Tamil Nadu. And this is one of the species which has been now taken up even for sort of conservation action in Karnataka and also in Kerala and Tamil Nadu already. Decalepis hamiltonii already covered. This is endemic, endangered. G means global. Because it is endemic, the assessment is global. Embelia arrives again critically endangered in Andhra, but vulnerable in Tamil Nadu and Orissa. So the assessments are state-wise, and depending on the kind of level of threat which is perceived by the botanists who have been, or field managers who have been going around and observing the populations. These are very helpful and useful for prioritizing action on the ground. Now the examples: Cocinium fenestratum, Garcinia indica. This is vulnerable globally because it is endemic to Western Ghats only. So we have assessed for this region. Saraka Ashoka, endangered but regionally, because the assessment has been done only for those areas like these three states of southern India and separately for Orissa. But that's all. It might be elsewhere also. That's why the assessment is regional. This is a global assessment because, as I said, it is endemic. This is a regional assessment because of the limited states where assessment has been done. It has not been done across the entire range of its occurrence. Now, based on all these assessments, what we need to do? I mean, if I summarize what is the action for conservation of Indian medicinal plants, we need to begin with a systematic and comprehensive inventory of plant species, medicinal plant species of each of these states by linking documentation of flora with traditional knowledge interpreted by various scholars and correlating to botanical names. Then we need an assessment of current levels of usage, consumption, and to prioritize species for conservation concern, including looking at the parts and products which are being used and the quantities involved. Then a detailed analysis of distribution pattern and endemism for preparation of a priority list, which then can be followed by a rapid threat assessment of such prioritized species using IUCN Red List categories and criteria, and identification of geographical regions where those species are occurring. And then finally, a network of medicinal plant conservation areas for promoting in situ conservation. Let's not presume that medicinal plant conservation areas network itself is the final answer. MPCA network is the beginning of promoting conservation and awareness about conservation in each of these regions. So these are the starting points. By the time we finished the work in southern India, we were having something like 55 MPCAs. Then 29 were established under UNDP program of CCF2, and some more have been now added by various efforts, including some supported by NMPB in different states. So more than 100 now exist across the country. Thank you.